part of the one of the ways of viewing the human condition is that we've fallen into the trance of believing every thought that passes through our minds and being sort of lived by thought. We get lost in thought. We live with thoughts crossing the mind, and we give all of our attention to them as if they were just the most vital and important and significant occurrences. And in so doing, if we follow the mind, we'll see that most of the thoughts are in some way either subtly judgmental, or they're projecting into the future, or they're commentary on the past. So becoming lost in the mind means we begin to view a world that feels in some ways contracted, and we're not really able to be fully present. In most deeper traditions, there's a certain value placed on the capacity to witness the mind, or simply witness life. And I've told a number of stories that have been moments in time when that capacity seemed to make itself known to me. One of them I've repeated over and over in previous weeks. I'll tell it again. It's very short. So I was in an ashram in India, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago. And we weren't there seeking gurus. We were just there acknowledging and sort of giving thanks for some of the spiritual traditions that have been upheld through that culture. But we happened to be at a particular ashram at one point where people were singing or chanting a Sanskrit chant, and it had been going on for a long time. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And for whatever reason, the sort of the way things were structured that night, there was a thing where this, they call it a form of satsang. But anyway, I won't go into any of that. I just noticed that as I looked around the room, what was actually being planned or called for wasn't really, I didn't really feel exactly a part of it. I was just kind of watching it all. And at that time I wasn't really in what I might call a witness state completely, but I was not necessarily engaged, you know. It's like, I want to go do this, you know, it wasn't in that. And I saw a guy leaning against a column. It was obvious that he had been there a long time, and he was pretty comfortable in his skin. That's all I could have said. I remember walking over to him, and we had maybe a few words passed, but it was only his final words that I recall today. We were just looking around, and all this singing and all this motion and movement were going on, and it was a very large ashram. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there. And he looked at me and he said, well, he said, after a while you realize it's all just happening. And although that sounds obvious, the real point, which is hard to conceptualize, I mean, it's just not, there's no way to put it into words, but we can point with the words. It's the perspective that life is an unfoldment. It's a happening. And one of the sort of most, I would say, pain-producing beliefs that we are run by most of the time is that there's something I need to do, either different or better, and underneath it is the dream that I am in control. I better do the right thing. Let's see, I better avoid doing the wrong thing. And And when that hidden thought runs us, there's a sense of a separate me that needs to do something. Underneath that, maybe I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. Underneath that, maybe I'm a separate person and I'm confined to a body. And the whole spiritual dimension is inaccessible to us. Resources are not available, we don't see correctly, we're caught in the mind in ways that maybe even be unconscious. We don't really even see it. When the real truth is that in any given moment, everything just sort of is as it is. And if there's no judgment, if we're not viewing it through the mind, if we just view it as what's happening, our eyes suddenly open to the realization that it's all a divine mystery play. And the infinite is playing every role in every moment. And it couldn't be more perfect than it is. And when there's no resistance to what's happening in the now, we automatically have access to the resources necessary in any given moment to respond appropriately to that moment. I had told this little story to all of you, most of you in this room, a number of times in recent weeks, and I'm also doing a little Skype class into a small group in Birmingham, Alabama. And I had not told them that story, and I did the other day. And the suggestion this morning is how simple it is to step out of the mind, even right this instant, and just notice that everything is happening. To actually see that it's just all one. It's one thing expressing through what appear to be many forms. And this woman had an experience after our class, and she asked me a question about it. And sometimes people ask a question, and I have no idea what the context for the question is. In email, I don't get a tone of voice or anything else, so I couldn't quite. I just said, "So what do you mean? Are you asking where form comes from?" Because I had pointed out that in essence we are the awareness within which all is happening. When she wrote back and gave me a little explanation, I thought I'd share it with you. I asked her permission to do this. So, the experience that brought up my question was that last night, and let me induct you into this. So, do you imagine that somebody else is talking here? There's one of us. Remember? So this is as much our experience as it is hers. Let's just have it with her. You want to? It's a pleasant experience. The experience that brought up my question was that last night I sat on our deck in a light rain. The experience was strange, sort of like what I imagined drugs must do to people. Things were happening around me, and I was just watching. I did not feel one with what was happening, but I did not feel disconnected either. Our neighbor's big white dog ran by silently in the rainy mist. We have a great neighborhood with a wide range of ages, professions, and races, and of course personalities, and there I was last night, right in the middle of them. Richard next door outside, creating a sculpture with Alabama rocks. And on the other side, a retired FBI agent turned writer who never comes outside. Another neighbor just made his transition last week. And another at that moment was sitting on a plane waiting for a repair before taking off for Paris. This is not easy for me to verbalize because, well, I just do not have words for the experience. This morning, the question does linger as to where does it all come from? But really, it's not a burning question. just a mild thought passing through, perhaps something for my mind to play with. And she, of course, could have no idea that that moment of conscious awareness, that it's all just happening, would then become our experience this morning. I did answer her, and these are more the teacher kinds of words, but just in case some of it. Her question, of course, we had talked about that we are in essence the pure awareness, unbroken, unchanging, ever present, and the world of form and movement appears in awareness. And the distinction is always, the critical distinction spiritually is always the same one, between what moves and what doesn't. Awareness is ever the same. Our mood can be dark or light. Our thoughts can be positive or negative. The sun can be up or down. No matter what occurs, it all simply registers in awareness. As awareness, we simply see it. And all the suffering we undergo is a result of our judging what's happening and then believing our thoughts and seeing the experience through the divided mind's judgments. So I had made that point before telling the story, and I'll elaborate now. The world of form is abstracted out of formlessness by conditioning. Awareness is unconditioned or formless, primarily, and then a portion of formlessness arises and appears as form, based upon both collective and individual conditioning. Are you following me here?
Mm-hmm.
We are the light. Light in spirituality gets really vastly misunderstood. The surface mind, when it interprets the word light, imagines that means like a big light going on. But what it really simply means is that which gives us the ability to know anything. It is awareness itself, as in this hand is appearing in awareness. If you don't say I'm a me and I'm stuck in a body and you're a you, you can't even say Mark's hand is appearing in awareness. You can only say there's a hand appearing in awareness. Everything that appears in this awareness, and we are all this same awareness, regardless of the fact that the mind might tend to automatically think it's somebody else's hand because it's identifying itself as a separated person seeing something or someone else. So this was the point being made in the class. It's often likened to a dream, meaning the world of form, dancing. Who are we really? We are, in essence and in absolute terms, formless, unconditioned awareness. More relatively speaking, we are also everything that appears in awareness. It sounds very much as if your experience is one of being the witness, watching without attachment, witnessing or observing the world of form. This is usually a critical, and I would say, highly desirable development, in that this detachment from form carries with it a sense of freedom from attachment to things going one way or another. In other words, when we're just simply watching the world of form in the East we call it a lila, In the West, we might say a divine mystery play, where the infinite is appearing as everything on the screen of awareness. As in the brief story I referred to, or that I told in our Skype class, it's all just happening. I'm attempting to make it possible for this morning for us to be actually inducted, to vibrate into simply seeing now together that we are the one. I am no more this body than that body back there. And the idea of separate me's is what, of course, gives rise to all the conflict and suffering. There's one light. And the fact that the light appears in a diverse number of beautiful and exquisite forms, personality structures, bodies, all appear. The appearance is not, well, I'll get to that in a minute. This freedom from attachment is quite beautiful and allows for an enjoyment of the mystery play unfolding in awareness. Eventually, consciousness expands to embody all one sees. Thus the teaching, there is only one reality. Embodiment does not mean we contain the truth in our physical bodies. Rather, we realize the physical body is also appearing in awareness, just as our neighbors are appearing in awareness. Pure awareness, in which all appears, is the larger body. There just are no separate persons. I recall you have a background I just happen to know a little bit about, or in Course in Miracles, and within that context, this is what the atonement or at-one-ment is referring to. And this is the context in which the Course says the physical body is an illusion. Not that it doesn't appear, but the idea that it's who we are. Meaning, who we are is not the little body. Who we are is unconditioned awareness/love. I add this last bit about embodiment just to point to where it's all heading, so to speak. For now, I'm mostly just wanting to appreciate the natural and spontaneous way in which consciousness shifted and provided a direct experience of the witness. The fact of such a shift occurring is, in my view, also an example of grace, since it just happened without any doing. So, if we're sitting here this morning and taking what's being said and placing it up in the mind to see what the mind thinks about it, we can't see this. We lose it right there. All it really amounts to is being here now and seeing what is appearing just as it is, sans any commentary. That doesn't mean that the mind should stop talking, because no one has the ability to simply stop the mind. But what we do have the ability to do is observe it all, including the mind. The mind can just go on and comment. Where is the mind's thoughts? Where do they appear? Except in the same awareness within which bodies and personalities and circumstances appear. And that's what it means, really, to wake up out of the mind. It doesn't have to come with choirs and harps playing in the background. It is nothing more or less than the simple ability to notice what's happening and not subject it to the commentary of the mind at all. Just to look at where the words are pointing, back to present awareness. So we sit here in the absolute light of awareness. And since awareness, being awareness, never changing, has to be unconditioned and unconditional in its acceptance of whatever appears in it. Has awareness ever argued with what appeared in it? Never. And that's the same as unconditional love. And it's who we are. As we look around this room and see faces, I make this pointer regularly. It works for me, and I suspect it sometimes can work for you. And just look at the faces and the eyes and realize they are all the same one that I am. This is what's meant by I am that. I am. All of it. It all appears now. And when there's no judgment, it's quite beautiful to notice how many diverse ways the one appears. And then the only judgment that awareness can ever make, and it doesn't make one at all, these are just words, but you find, sometimes the words are helpful, they point, it's got to be the judgment of innocence. We don't really even understand how we wound up in this form. How did consciousness wind up appearing as it is appearing now, in this particular shape and form? What organized this? And of course, the answer to that question is not really one we're seeking. We're seeking, if we're seeking at all, and I think the seeking energy is fine. It's what, why wouldn't we seek if we've suffered? To see better. But we simply want to see again that there's no one to blame and no one's wrong. There's only one of us. And it's beautiful, just as it appears. The witness, as I said to her, is not the ultimate awakening, but it's a stage of awakening where consciousness is no longer trapped in the mind. It's not egoic, it's simply not a complete awakening. Complete awakening, meaning embodiment, means, and I've yet to experience, although the ego has disappeared for the guy called Mark up here on numerous occasions for periods of time, there's never been a moment in which I experienced that everything I saw was actually and deeply, fully the same self that I am. So we may have a little more conditioning to be dissolved before that sort of embodiment may occur. But who cares? Meanwhile, we can enjoy the mystery play and open to the possibility that we can walk around in the world without having to judge anything. And seeing again that it's all just happening. What a liberation. What a freedom. Since I don't know everyone I'm speaking to this morning, and can't know what your backgrounds are, I can never know whether the words that I'm using are actually allow for you to shift into what we're pointing to here. But I'm suggesting it just so we can look and see if we're able to look around. I mean, this is what's called the holy instant. And that all that's required is that it not be subjected to the judgmental mind, to the conditioned awareness. We're not suggesting that we've got rid of all of our conditioning at this moment. We're just suggesting that we can view our conditioning too as simply stuff flowing through awareness. It doesn't mean that there's anybody wrong or that anything should be other than it is. I'm kind of remembering a story that one of my first teachers, long before I could see what I'm pointing to now, told about the human condition. Now, it's a story that most of you have been exposed to, but probably the punchline he adds at the end will be a little bit different. It's the story of some scientists that decided to do an experiment. with some mice and in a maze, and they put some cheese somewhere down into the maze, and then they'd release the mice, and the mice would run around in the maze sniffing until they found the cheese. And then after a little while, when the mice would be released, after a few opportunities to be released, they would then go straight to the cheese. They knew right where it was, no more wrong turns. Then they would move the cheese, and the mice would run straight to the place where the cheese used to be. And then they would back up, and even as mice, they'd look a little confused, what happened? Then they would eventually redirect themselves and once again find their way to the cheese. And they did this several times, and the mice would always adjust and eventually find the cheese, even though they looked a little befuddled each time it was moved for a bit. So the scientists determined that mice must be more intelligent than humans, since humans run to where the cheese never was and insist that it be there. And then Sig would say at the end, you might say the kingdom of cheese is within you. But the point is really not about humans, it's about the mind. And our tendency, because of our conditioning, to look to the surface mind for answers and to believe what it's saying, when the largest part of what it's saying is simply conditioning that received from unenlightened parents and an unenlightened culture and society, and of course, obviously and innocently took in and believed. And all we're really attempting to do in this morning's lesson, at any rate, is just sort of, tilt or shift out of that tendency to look here between the ears to see what's right and wrong, and only just open our eyes and look. Because from what I call the heart, which is not, although in certain traditions there's a chakra, I'm not really talking about a chakra. Within the illusion of a physical body, thank God, we had placed in us kind of a doorway to open up to the realization that it's all love, and we can feel it. It's very subtle, but again, it's soft. Just focusing attention on what I call the heart, which is kind of a gateway into infinite love, softens our perspective. It's like all of a sudden things get gentle. And we look around and we see the absolute wonderment of everything, just as it is. "40 years of puttering around in these sort of metaphysical, mystical / spiritual teachings has shown me that the simplicity of the truth is often so overlooked in favor of teachings that promise the ego something that it can't deliver, when everything can and does just flow by grace. There's really no need to appeal to the ego's belief that it can get its way and have what it wants and suddenly have not your will but mine be done. There's so much of that that's sort of couched in nice sounding words because it still appeals. And we want to let go of that appeal. The truth is that when we're not pushing and pulling, as in able to see that it's all just happening, life, and to use some of Eckhart Tolle's terms, it becomes more benign. There's not a need for us. The suffering is the result. What is suffering but resistance to what is? I don't want this to be this way. I don't want this, and I want something that isn't. It's pushing and pulling on the holy unfolding instead of seeing the wonderment and the beauty and the miracle of the moment and the absolute innocence of everything. So a lot of what I tend to do is try to at least, I try to express in as simple a terms as I can what the predicament is. And the predicament is not difficult to comprehend. It's getting lost in the mind and becoming identified with thought and conditioning again. So much of the day, probably for most of us in the room, we are still being run unconsciously by self-centered thoughts that are coming from a perceived separate self and separate body about a separate world that it then perceives. But there is nothing out there. There's nothing but the one, and we're it. But along with that comes also for me the need for there to be this, I think, it's an incomprehensible and indescribable love. Because if we're judging anything that appears in the dream, we're again caught. It's that subtle. The minute I take your inventory, in other words, someone is talking to me and I judge them as, well, they're caught in their stuff. It's one thing to recognize ego. It's another thing to separate myself from them and make them a little more wrong and me a little more right. They are me. And anyone trapped in any degree of separation and conditioning is nothing but a call for love. Not spoken love. I think the vast majority of the time we're best off by simply knowing that who we're talking to is ourselves and that we're all innocent. We don't need to convey a, quote, spiritual teaching. That often gets mixed up in then does it fit in their belief systems? If not, then they go straight to their mind and see if they believe what you're saying. It can create more conflict than resolution. At some point, we have to transcend all of the various models that we may have used to get here, whether that model is, the power of now or the Course in Miracles or, if it's some particular, I've been exposed to everything, literally everything. I've been ested and gestalted and, I had my aura and my palms read, my chakras balanced and, been with, I can't tell you how many, quote, gurus in India. Of course, I was fortunate in understanding all along in India that there's nobody out there, that the appearance of the teacher is just an appearance in the dream of the truth. And it's a temporary function, the so-called teacher-student relationship. It's a temporary function. The one divides itself up, and one plays the role of teacher and the other the student until the student no longer requires the teacher to remind him or her who they really are. And, the student can become the teacher and the tables get turned overnight, anywhere, anytime. I was fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to teach in groups of people where I'm sure I had people in the audience that were clearer than I was at the time. They simply came in to support me because I was a decent public speaker and some of the radiance of truth was shining through me. I could almost sense it at times that individuals would sit in the room and be present just as I was present and perhaps even more conscious. The whole model of, people that are ahead of people and behind people and greater and lesser souls and all that sort of, malarkey needs to be just dumped. There's one of us. And it's beautiful. And it did enter into form and become lost in form and trapped in thought and wrongly conditioned with error, thought, and false belief. The witness is the capacity to even view the wrong thought and the conditioning and the false belief with great love, but not be identified with it, just as the dog ran silently through the mist in Alabama. One can look at one's conditioned mind in just that way. Simply a thought that I once believed. There it goes. Wow. And I used to believe that. I'm not okay. Says, I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, there's something wrong with him. He's asleep. I'm awake. The subtle inflations and deflations that go on. And we don't need to make any of them wrong because they're all natural unfoldments. For us to have been trapped in consciousness has been lost in form. A portion of consciousness has. And having been trapped in form, the way out is love. Let it be as it is and understand that conditioning has almost the entire human race still trapped. There are very, very, very few individuals, even now on earth, who don't actually believe that when their mind says I, it means them, a separate body. They believe that. Somebody told them that there's only one of us, it wouldn't penetrate at all. Wouldn't be able to be recognized yet. And our response to that, is it compassion? Ooh, what would it be like not to have sensed this other dimension? The light shining in and through and as everyone and everything, always. We only have to remember it in this holy instant. It's the only one there is. There's another little story I've referred to at times that says it, I think, relatively simply, and simple is always the answer as far as I can see. It's one I've repeated in this room, but I'll just allude to it. It's just a short story by J.D. Salinger, the author of the classic Catcher in the Rye. It's called Teddy, about a little boy that in a past life was an awakened llama, but he didn't quite finish his work. Somewhere he kind of got sucked in a little bit, and so he has to, because of his not quite completing his spiritual awakening, in this lifetime he's been born into a Western family. And he finds himself he just cannot comprehend the value system that he's been born in, but he hasn't quite remembered what it is he really knew in previous lifetimes. But he remembers it pretty early, and as he does, he begins to be somewhat gifted, and that gets recognized, and so he's been tested, and at one point he takes a trip with his family to England, where some people want to ask him questions because he's this phenomena. And on the way back, there's a reporter on the ship. They're on a cruise ship, and the reporter wants to know. He's trying to get the scoop. Let's put it that way. But he doesn't really know what to ask Teddy. But Teddy's about 8 years old at this point, and he gets to him finally, and he says, he's asking him these various questions, and Teddy is sort of responding in non-linear ways, and the guy's not following. He doesn't get it. Kind of like I said, if we pointed out to people we're all one, for the most part, it would be wasted words. And anyway, finally he says to him, so, well, what, how old were you, when you realized whatever it is you realized? And Teddy said, well, he said, I think I was about 6. And he said, my little sister was about a year and a half old, and she was sitting in her high chair drinking a glass of milk when I realized that it's all just God pouring God into God. So I'll summarize this morning and also complete it by simply saying that the problem that we're addressing is the problem of being trapped in the conditioned, separated mind, believing the mind and its thoughts, and being identified with those thoughts as if they were terribly important. And in many cases, they're who we are. When thoughts are obviously, as everything else in the world of form is, things that come and go. And who we are cannot possibly be something that comes and goes. We are the very light of awareness and pure love in which all things appear. To underestimate the mind's conditioning and its ability in many of us to cause us to fall asleep again, which means I'm thinking, and my thoughts are important. And I'm not here anymore, but I don't notice that. I'm in my mind, thinking thoughts are all important. This is what happens to most human beings, even those of us that suggest we are on a spiritual path. And unless we learn to witness it, just as we do, say, if we are the person in the story, watching the dog running through the light mist at night in Alabama, seeing that it's all just happening, then we'll be trapped in it. And when we're trapped in it, the world appears as a place filled with good and bad and right and wrong and conflict and suffering and problems and solutions, all of which the mind imagines it's up to it to solve. And all that's really being asked for is a complete shift away from attending to every thought as if it were the most significant thing in the world, and opening our eyes in the holy instant and seeing the wonderment and the beauty of these vast variety of forms and shapes that the one takes. Then we're able, once again, to appreciate that it's all a mystery play. And just as actors on a stage are not the roles, so the actors on this stage are not the roles. On the small stage, the actors happen to know that they aren't the roles. On this stage, many people as yet do not know that. And as the redeeming light, if there's a function, it's to see again. From innocence that can only see innocence, because we're not seeing through the mind. So this Sunday, as we take off to do whatever we do, including get food and celebrate the birth of a body, why not take a break from filtering everything through the mind and let the grace of love sort of embody itself a little bit more. Let our eyes just be open. And in just looking, It is all beautiful. Innocent is an understatement. It's a wonderment.